God of War probably isn't the first game that comes to mind when you think of clones. In fact, now that the series has gone from one thing to something entirely different, this whole style of hack and slash game is becoming sort of a relic. Mechanically speaking, the original God of War was nothing new, but is the amalgamation of decades of action platformers into one extremely fun experience. Kratos is one of Sony's only actual mascots to last more than a generation or two, and his hyper-violent escapades have captured literally millions. My normie friends are always popping off about the latest adventure of God and Boy, and that's more than you could say for Suikoden 1 and 2 Remastered. Santa Monica Studios' God of War franchise has had such wild success with not only its aesthetic and interesting storytelling, but also the gameplay. So much so that it, like many other hits before it, have become a staple of how third-person action games should be. This thing practically mainstreamified mashy QuickTime events in order to do super over-the-top glory kills, and you still see those everywhere. So I always thought that when the late 2000s rolled around that your third-person action gameplay styles embarked on one of four routes. You had Souls-likes with their slower, more unforgiving nature, Devil May Cry's with their stylish and heavily involved combo systems, usually scored all old school. Then we've got Arkham's and God of Wars. You know what I mean by Arkham's. For a while there, and still kinda today, a lot of games were doing the Batman Arkham Asylum thing, but prior to that, it was all about Kratos. Fast and frenzied attacks, multiple weapons, light platforming, simple combo strands, and usually it was easy enough for anyone to pick up and play. Just maybe don't give this one to a child. Speaking of clones, I mean, we literally just talked about Sonic Unleashed, which is half a God of War, so this is quite literally the next logical step. Just a little less werehog. So yo, it's Austin, and today we're gonna be talking about the now forgotten world of God of War clones. There was like a 5-year period where pretty much every hack and slash wanted to follow in the steps of the Greek god, and for those of us who were there, it was a lot. But before we follow the footsteps of some others who followed some footsteps, let's check in with some other champions with today's sponsor, you know the one, Raid Shadow Legends.
I'm back, baby.
Pick up the phone, it's raid time. And if you haven't started playing yet, there's quite literally millions of others who have already picked up the ball. Raid is a team-based RPG with over 650 champions from different factions. You like making different teams and min-maxing customization? This is the game for you. It's totally free to play, easy to pick up and put down, and there's tons of bosses you can challenge, or you can take on real players in PvP in the arena. I, for one, like the sheer variety of champions at your disposal. There's so many different combinations and party comps that you can put together. And it helps that you got a lot of cool champions to power up. I myself am a big fan of Talia, she's cute, and who else has a giant sword that they can shoot fire out of? Not me. That's for sure. So this month, Raid's actually introducing a bunch of new stuff, including a new dungeon and artifact ascension. The Sand Devil's Necropolis is sure to be a challenge for every player, and there's a bunch of new champions making the rounds. Y'all know the holidays are here, and we've got brand new champs of the festive variety too. Raid's got a new extra bonus now. You can get legendary champion Ronda Chase based off of famed athlete Ronda Rousey for free. You just gotta play 7 days between now and February 20th, no matter if you're new or a longtime player. You can also use promo code RAIDRONDA to get some items to boost them up. Also, if you're an Amazon Prime member, you can get your exclusive rewards in Raid right now. So here's what you gotta do. You gotta click the link down in the description or scan the QR code on the top right, and that's gonna get you a bunch of unique bonuses worth $30. There's the new champion Aina, along with 200,000 silver, 1 energy refill, 1 XP boost, and an ancient shard so you can get more champs. This is available for 30 days for all new players. Just make sure to navigate over here on your phone in order to snag the rewards. So click that link in the description, get the bonus for me, and start playing Raid Shadow Legends today.
Goodbye.
Thanks again for visiting Mr. Shadow Legends. Now, for more video games, or more specifically, God of War clones. Prior to the original God of War coming out, there were a ton of hack and slashes. It's not like it was a brand new idea or anything. However, you can definitely see when they started to take inspiration from it. So how about them Proto God of Wars? You know, the ones that helped shape the genre. There's a lot. I think everyone knows God of War wasn't a new concept. It's similar to, say, Pokemon. It wasn't the first RPG to do the Monster Collection thing. That honor would probably fall on something like Digital Devil's Story Megami Tensei. But it was Pokemon that really popularized the concept into something so marketable and well-liked that even though your game runs like absolute trash, it'll still be the fastest selling Nintendo game ever. Something like God of War has its roots in things like Dynasty Warriors. That wanted to throw a ton of dudes at you, not necessarily make you think too too hard about individual fights and let you do a little bit of juggling. I think that's the main thing about old school God of War anyways. Yeah, there's encounters and enemies that require a little bit of thinking, but when the fodder comes out, start swinging around those blades of chaos like it's nobody's business. Some people like to use the word clone the other way, but 3 years prior to Kratos, we'd get Rygar the Legendary Adventure. Easily one of the most visually and gameplay similar titles you could get. It's hard to argue that when you look at them side by side. Sword on a chain, shield on a chain. Although God of War has a clear one up in the voice acting.
Is that the monster from my dream?
Ah, geez. Made by Tecmo, who were 100% games in this era, Rygar is a reboot of an old Japanese arcade and NES platformer that by all means wasn't very memorable. But this dude flinging his shield around like a weapon was, and the console version was neat. I played it as a little kid, it's really hard. Flash forward to 2002 and we've got The Legendary Adventure, a 3D action platformer that kinda just looks like God of War in multiple aspects, just maybe with a little less violence and boobs. It doesn't help that they're both heavily inspired by Greek and Roman mythology, so a lot of the architecture and even enemy styles are basically the same. It does play quite a bit slower though, as Rygar's shield swing has a bit more weight to it. You can knock dudes around and feel like a super powerful guy, but it's not quite, you know, grabbing someone and ripping them in half. The puzzle platforming does feel similar though. It kind of treads into Zelda territory at times with the exploration, and the environments feel like big open vistas, even if the whole thing is level based. Rygar the Legendary Adventure was pretty good for the time and still holds up decently enough, but definitely has that Proto God of War feeling. And you'd be seeing a decent amount of these. Prior to God of War, you had Forgotten Realms Demon Stone. I think this one's a total hidden gem these days, and it's one that's kinda halfway between God of War and the super good Lord of the Rings 2 Towers video game, which makes sense because the developer Stormfront Studios made it. Who would have thought? Demon Stone has you controlling one of 3 characters and going on a D&D adventure, actually written by famed author R.A. Salvatore, which also means you're getting some dritzed. Sorry to all the Drow haters out there. Kinda similar to this, but there was also Gauntlet 7 Sorrows, the follow-up to Gauntlet Legends. This technically came out a little after God of War, but they'd obviously be developed at the same time. You could tell they wanted to add more weight to the combat as opposed to doing the button mashy, kill a million rats, green wizard needs food badly shtick that they were doing, but it lost a little bit of the charm in the process. This one lacks the combo depth. But if you want blood and guts, there's no better Proto GoW to hop into than Nano Breaker. A Konami-made hack and slash that's so bloody, they decided to count the gallons of blood you spilled in the corner of the screen. Also, this game takes place in 2021. I knew the last few years were something else, but I think I forgot this happening. Nano Breaker really lets you let loose in a way that does tread into God of War territory, but unfortunately has quite a bit of jank that holds it back. It has you fighting a lot of dudes at the same time, with different weapons, with different bits of platforming here and there. The one thing it does well is have you manually customize your combos, but those combos never really reach the heights or fluidness of Kratos swinging around like a madman. Though for real, this is like some Elfen Lied levels of blood, as in excessive and for no reason. Don't mind me, just video gamifying murder. There's other hack and slashes from this era, absolutely, but these and maybe like Genji are the closest it would get to God of War before that style would become dominant, which means it's gonna get a lot more obvious. So God of War is officially out. It and its sequel get a ridiculous amount of praise, and they're both some of the highest reviewed games on the console. Heck, the sequel sells over 4 million copies despite coming out in 2007, like 2 years into the next gen. Enough time has passed, and it's time for the clones. The first few were obvious, to say the least. I'm not talking about something like Viking Battle for Asgard, which definitely did take the whole ancient mythology stick and ran with it. That's a whole thing in itself, but I'm talking about Conan. Developed by Nihilistic Software, the people behind Marvel Nemesis Rise of the Imperfects, which is just the worst to start. THQ's Conan is about as shameless as you could get. Advertised as a mishmash of hack and slashes out there, the team pulled influence from both God of War and Ninja Gaiden in order to toss this together. Unfortunately, the release schedule got borked up pretty bad. Originally slated for 2008, they pushed it up to 2007 due to THQ having a bad fiscal year, most likely resulting in, well, a lack of polish. And that it did. Conan is a decent concept. I mean, it's Conan the Barbarian. You go, you slice dudes up, go unga bunga and look at half naked people. There's no D sliders like in Exiles, but you do have the ability to change weapons on the fly. You've got quite a basic array of combos tied to whatever weapon you're holding, and you switch by quite literally grabbing whatever's around you. You kill a dude, you could probably use his weapon. Though it doesn't seem to matter too much because the AI here is, scared? Conan doesn't feel great, but that actually might be the best thing about it, because the jank makes the violent moments more comical than anything. Dudes will just die in ridiculous positions, and I'm always down for some stupid ragdolling. But at the end of the day, it's very much a God of War clone, and you'd best believe that you'll be mashing out QTEs at every turn. It's like a perfect 6 out of 10, but also incredibly bland and without anything pushing it to that next level. It also came out in the same year as God of War 2, months later, and in most ways, it just felt like a big step back. Conan is cool, but not that cool. Well, why does this look like the Californication music video? Speaking of obvious, how about the time Sony tried to do the exact same thing again? I think a lot of people forget about Heavenly Sword, especially the fact that it came out in the same year as God of War 2, which frankly is easy to do considering Sony has never ported it and hasn't brought it up for nearly a decade. But I remember Heavenly Sword being like super hyped before it came out. It was one of those games that was supposed to save the PlayStation 3, and visually it looked miles above anything we'd seen at the time. Famed voice actors and the hype machine were one thing, but also the main character Nariko was one they were trying to push as a sex symbol. Kind of like Lara Croft or Aki Final Fantasy Spirits Within. Her sword isn't the only thing that's heavenly. What does that even mean? Well, that was only enough to bring it to around 1 million in sales, which unfortunately didn't break even, which is a shame. I thought Ninja Theory's way more cinematic take on the hack and slasher was a pretty decent time, even if it had a ton of framey technical issues and required a lot of the 6-axis. Heavenly Sword has its moments, and its flashiness and over-the-top ridiculous hair physics have always stuck with me, but it's definitely borderline more of a tech demo more than a full-length game that I would recommend playing. But you know what wasn't a tech demo? Castlevania Lords of Shadow. Coming out 3 years later in 2010, Castlevania Lords of Shadow was quite the polarizing point for a lot of classic Castlevania fans. For starters, it was the first game in a while to have nothing to do with the long-running series director and producer Koji Igarashi. But it was also completely different than everything this series had done for the last decade or so, as in it was straight up God of War, like kind of one-to-one. Developed by Spanish video game studio Mercury Steam, the people behind American McGee's Scrapland and nowadays Metroid Dread, Lords of Shadow is a more than capable God of War clone and a very different entry into the Castlevania franchise. You just gotta set your expectations before going in, cause if you're wanting Order of Ecclesia, you're gonna be disappointed. Though that game freaking slaps. Oh, also Koji Pro's here. You play as Gabriel Belmont, the saddest Belmont there ever was. Seriously, this dude looks like he's about to start crying anytime he's on the screen. Like, bro, it's gonna be okay. It goes through all the Kratos staples, but your main weapon is the combat cross, which is like multiple Castlevania staples in one. A super powerful whip in the shape of a crucifix? Yep. You can use light and shadow magic to do more damage or heal up, and generally things feel really good. I've got no complaints with Lords of Shadow 1 other than the fact that I generally prefer 2D Castlevanias, but I mean, that's not really fair to say. But hey, Konami's reboot gamble paid off, and Lords of Shadow became the highest selling game in the franchise still to this day. It has some absolutely stunning vistas that still look great in 2022, and a lot of the boss fights smell of Shadow of the Colossus. Sure, it's not super original, but this Hollywoodified Castlevania is a solid time for just about anyone. On the other hand, the sequel, Lords of Shadow 2, was not met so kindly. I'm not too sure as to why, as I never played it, but it seems like every review and a thread I read about it can't decide on one thing either. So I guess, in conclusion, gamers are upset. With the super obvious and notable out of the way, I think that we should go a little bit deeper. A few years after God of War's initial success, you would start to see more and more of these copycats come out of very varying quality. Some were decent, some were great, and some were neither of those. Just like the film industry, we've got B games. And some of those suck. Like Golden Axe Beast Rider, a game that wanted to be God of War so bad, but failed in every aspect. I've played it before, can't do it again. In the early 2010s, digital gaming platforms began to take more and more market space, most notably because of Steam. I'm an old school disc and CD key kind of guy, so the idea of a central store holding everything I've ever bought with DRM was a little unnerving, but its ease of use and popularity has kind of made it the to-go spot for, well, everything. It's spread between a lot of platforms now, but in this era, if you wanted to play a smaller B game, indie or whatever, it would probably hop on Steam. That also means you're gonna get a lot lot of not so good games, like Garchasp, the Monster Slayer. An extremely ambitious title originally developed out of Iran, does God of War pretty much one for one, or at least it tried to. This weird looking guy with his extremely weird looking face goes through all the hack and slash staples. You got heavy and light attacks, grab combos. See the red orb? You got open it for souls, or whatever the currency's called. Pretty much the same thing. You kinda just level up mid-combat, and if you're mashing away, you won't get to see your new combos. I don't think time has been kind to this font. Enemies have way too much health, the combat is super janky, and overall it's not very fun. For some reason, I think the lighting is busted on newer graphics cards because everything is just so bright. It isn't very good, but it was a pretty big deal to have something of this ambition and scale come out on the indie scene. It kinda got memed about back in the day, and for some reason even managed to get a sequel, Garchasp Temple of the Dragon. A game that came out a year later, doesn't have a wiki or any real development info on it, and is just basically more of the same. I like the idea of Garchasp. He's based off a mythological figure from Persia, a cool monster slayer that, I guess, slays monsters, but these games kinda suck. I do like saying the word Garchasp. Frickin' Garchasp. It certainly rolls off the tongue easier than Marlo, Briggs, and the Mask of Death. Another B game, but this one's more Deadly Premonition than actually bad. And it's also quite literally a B-movie style game. They told him to go to hell. He was dead ready. I think that's a typo. Already? Marlo Briggs is one of the weirdest games to come out in this era. Developed by Zootfly and Microsoft Studios, this came out in 2013, and I'm totally surprised this thing didn't make a louder bang. It quite literally starts with one and fire everywhere, as Marlo is a firefighter. He's going on vacation with his archaeologist girlfriend Eva, who's definitely not taking a vacation, who realizes that, hey, maybe this Heng Long dude is extremely evil, I should quit. Then Marlo's killed with a totally normal scythe, resurrected by it, and it's just non-stop explosions. And that's just like the first 5 minutes. Thankfully, the pacing doesn't really stop, and this B-movie style video game keeps its ridiculousness coming at you the entire time. And it's got some pretty decent gameplay. It's, well, a clone of God of War. It's very similar. The weapons are similar to their Kratosian counterparts, and frankly, it's better off for doing that. Obviously, the huge budget God of War titles are gonna be the smoothest and best, but you can't hate on a digital-only title that launched at $15. One that you could snag frequently on sale now for like 99 cents. It's obviously not perfect. The AI can be pretty brain dead. There's practically zero replay value, and the vistas are lacking variety and scale. I hope you like jungles, temples, and machines. That's all you're getting. But this thing was way cooler than it had any right to be, even if it's a little glitchy. And it helps that you don't have any kind of expectations there, like with a sequel. If you tell me that a classic 80s or 90s franchise is gonna be getting a reboot, then there's gonna be some hype and expectations, especially if it's something as bizarre as Splatterhouse, a game for the longest time I thought was Sega. That's on me though. I've always associated the classic Splatterhouse 2 and 3 with the Sega Genesis, and they weren't ever seen elsewhere, so it's like, yeah, of course. But no, Namco's classic ode to Western 80s horror has itself a Famicom game. The 2010 Splatterhouse Reboot is marred in controversy for multiple reasons. During development, Namco Bandai effectively took the game away from the original dev, Bottle Rocket, in turn causing them to have to shutter. There's a leaked footage trailer out there showcasing the original version with a lot more realistic and gritty visuals than we ended up getting. Hyperviolence? Meet cell shading. And also a Metacritic score of 59. Alright. Splatterhouse Reboot is a really interesting game because it has a lot of ideas that play around with the God of War mainstays. This is like prime QTE time, and these things pop up a lot. Except when you mash them in this game, everything turns into a blood fountain. Like Nano Breaker. Yeah, that's a little much. I'm not gonna show too much of that, but the combat is overall a little bare bones, especially when you compare it to other clones in this video. It's fun in spurts, and some of the combos you unlock do look cool, but it lacks depth. When you look at the gameplay here compared to the original trailer, even though it allegedly didn't run well, it really makes you think. The biggest saving grace here is the story and everything that goes on with that. You play as kinda normal wife guy Rick, who, well, basically ends up being in the same situation as Marlo Briggs, except instead of being possessed by a scythe, it's a mask that hulks you out. The terror mask is kinda like the stone mask from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, except it's one voiced by the extremely talented Jim Cummings, Mr. Pingas himself. The voice he does for this is somewhere between Darkwing Duck, Winnie the Pooh's Tigger, and that one Ventrilo harassment video.
Don't wait for Jim. You'll all be joining her soon enough.
I got a ring in there last night.
Ultimately, Splatterhouse's disappointment because of what it could have been. It's clear the troubled dev cycle neutered a lot of this, and even with a delay, it still fell short. There are some neat touches and fun moments here and there. The devs really paid homage to the original Splatterhouse games in some of the 2D sections. Heck, you can even unlock all 3 of the original titles. There's also a lot of fun and smaller interactions with the enemies and environments in combat, but this game is way harder than it needed to be. It's very repetitive, glitchy, the load times are killer, and even with a dope soundtrack, it's something that comes off as clearly unfinished, which I guess considering what happened, makes sense. There's a really nice Polygon article that goes into a lot of detail, or even my bud Matt McMuscle's What Happened on it. Check those out because they know way more about the splats than I do. But in terms of B games and God of War clones, you really can't go wrong with Marlo Briggs. To me, nothing says 3D hack and slash quite like a licensed game, and in the 7th gen when these were still popping off left and right, God of War was still the new hotness. So, of course, take one, the other, put it together, and we have a bunch of those. If you had yourself a superhero or a cool heroic character, you could toss them into one of these and it would be a pretty decent fit, at least most of the time. As we learned with Thor God of Thunder, that's not always the case.
Stupid.
I'm not really sure why, but combining comic book characters with God of War was like the thing to do. Beyond Thor, you had like Ghost Rider, which felt somewhere between this and Devil May Cry. There was the movie licensed Green Lantern, Rise of the Manhunters, that is way better than the film, which isn't hard to do. Then you've got some actually pretty good games in the formula, like Star Wars The Force Unleashed or Afro Samurai, the latter of which I covered in the past and still kinda like. Then we come to Hellboy, The Science of Evil for the PlayStation 3, aka the darkest video game I've ever played. What in the world? I can't see. Based off the Del Toro film and coming out 4 years later, Chrome Studios and Konami's Hellboy is a bit of a disaster. I feel like Hellboy's destined to never have a good game as a whole, but this attempt was something else. Not that it's fair to compare at all, but Heavenly Sword came out a whole year prior, then Hellboy be looking genuinely like a PS2 game. There's some neat ideas. You've got different types of ammunition that have different purposes, be it for combat or opening chests, but it doesn't seem to deviate too far from that. Its only saving grace is that there's a cooperative multiplayer mode, but that also requires convincing someone to play Hellboy PS3 with you, and that might be a challenge. I would have gone further in, but my copy kept crashing, so yeah, apparently it does get brighter. I can't believe they announced a brand new Hellboy game literally yesterday as I was editing this video, but it is what it is. I hope it's good. However, you know what rules and is visible from start to finish? X-Men Origins Wolverine. I've been wanting to cover this for a while now, and what better time? We're playing the PlayStation 3 version, the Uncaged Edition. X-Men Origins Wolverine is one of those games that has several different versions, the type of thing that I like to talk about. There's one for the PS2 and Wii, one on the 7th gen consoles, one on the PSP, another on the Nintendo DS, and lastly, one on Java devices, your Blackberries. So yeah, 5 completely different tie-ins for a movie that, well, kinda sucked. Still to this day, the only way I'll watch this film is via that leaked work print with its hysterical unfinished CG. I shouldn't laugh at this, but I do. Also, what were they thinking with Deadpool? There's not enough time. The PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 versions of Wolverine are the only proper God of War clones. The previous gen has some of the same DNA, but lacks the speed and scale of the big kid version. Although, I do love the plaid shirt. However, the reason the next gen SKUs are titled Uncaged is because they're the only ones with blood and guts. And oh boy, is Wolverine one of the most violent things I've ever played. Ew, oh my god, they got away with that? Fully embracing the fact that Wolverine's special abilities include healing, developer Raven Software went full Mortal Kombat and upped the violence to levels unseen in, well, most comics, movies, and every adaptation of everyone's favorite X-person. Anytime you deal or take damage, there's gonna be body parts flying around and holes. If you ever wanted to see straight through Logan, here you go. This is totally what we're gonna get in Deadpool 3, huh? The game itself, it's not perfect, but it is an extremely fun God of War clone. One that gets you really powered up and slicing through dudes like it's nothing. It's just like many titles in this video, a little repetitive after a few hours. Despite using primarily one weapon, the claws, your moveset is more varied than you'd think. You'll combine light and heavy attacks along with abilities that use a gamified representation of rage in order to pull off crazy moves like a tornado spin, most of which feel pretty good to pull off. But easily my favorite thing here is the lunge attack. You don't just use it to platform, you also use it to jump around long distances in combat, sometimes even a vehicle vehicle to keep moving. You're basically grabbing dudes and bouncing off the walls like a cat with zoomies, but just one that wants to kill people. Things feel good, and the only major thing holding this back is definitely the technical issues. It's like I always say, that 7th generation of consoles was stinky. Running this thing natively on my cell processorified PlayStation 3, I was getting tons of frame dips pretty much anytime I was in combat. Not to mention the pop-in, the Unreal Engine 3 Special. Wow, this is still going. Obviously, since this was published by Activision and can't be obtained anywhere anymore, I don't expect this licensed gem will ever get a port ever, so it'll remain with that crust. It did come out on the PC, but the only way you're getting that is by sailing the high seas. However, thanks to the modern power of emulation, you can run this thing pretty well and see what a fully, well, uncaged Wolverine looks like. Before Arkham Asylum came out later that year, to me at least, X-Men Origins Wolverine was the superhero video game, the God of War clone, and I hope more people check it out. It's so much better than the movie it's based on, and even though it's a quick 7 to 9 hour long experience, there's plenty to hold your attention. You like costumes? Here, have Yellow Suit Wolverine. What's not to like? It was a rare tie-in that was good in a time where they were mostly bad, and digital Hugh Jackman never looked so good, even if he's just lathered in blood. There's other licensed Kratos likes to get into, but if we go into those, we'll be here all day. So yada yada, excited for the new Insomniac game? Yeah, okay, next. One more to tackle today, and it's hands down the most obvious of the bunch, but also a game I really enjoyed. It's also a little bit of every category we've gone over. When people think of God of War clone, the first thing that probably comes to mind is Dante's Inferno, and it's a good one. Based off Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, Dante's Inferno is something that by all means should have bombed. I mean, the ad campaign and even original announcement video literally told anyone watching to go to hell. And while super appropriate to the source material, it had Daikatana energy. However, you put Bill Withers' Ain't No Sunshine into a video game trailer and I'ma listen. Published by EA and developed by Visceral Games, this was really freaking cool. Those first trailers made it super evident that this was going to be treading pretty close to Kratos territory, but I feel like no one really cared. I'm not really sure if it was consumer apathy, what people expected of EA, or at this point the hack and slash genre kind of normalizing, but this came out without any real controversy or a Vanilla Ice moment.
Ding, 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 that little bitty change.
It's super close too. Extremely similar camera angles, puzzles, heck, you even activate chests and relics the exact same way. It's kind of an egregious copycat, but Visceral gave it a bunch of small touches to make it shine. The whole game is also just like the coolest concept. Imagine Doom, but more religious. You play as, well, Dante, a Templar who totally didn't do anything wrong. He's killed, vows to redeem himself, sews a cross into his chest, and is just trying to save his dead lover's soul. Like, the first boss battle, pretty much right out of the gate, is against Death himself. You murder him, steal his scythe, dive into hell, and go deeper and deeper until you fight Lucifer. It's like Diablo, but with way more yeah. In fact, I can't really show you a huge bulk of the runtime here, otherwise we'd get demonetized. I'm very surprised that EA managed to get away with this back in the day. But what else would you expect from the company that hired Christian protesters as a publicity stunt? Yeah, I'm serious. The game itself, it's fun. Like, way better than you'd probably imagine. You've got 2 different attack styles, Death's Scythe as well as a Holy Cross. You unlock additional combos as you level up with usage of souls, which obviously plays into the theme of Dante's totally not selfish and charitable actions. The scythe works for close and mid-ranged attacks, while the cross throws out giant ranged beams in the shape of a crucifix. It sounds pretty ridiculous when I say it out loud. You'll be fighting hordes and hordes of hell demons, the misshaped remnants of the damned, and physical representations of each circle of hell. It starts really strong, and it feels on par with your God of Wars in terms of spectacle, environments, and things to do. Your combat growth feels good, the aesthetics gel nicely, and each half hour you spend feels refreshing. Then, for some reason, the back half of this feels really samey. The world becomes largely brown and gray. The puzzles and enemies get rehashed multiple times, and it honestly just kind of comes off like Visceral Games ran out of budget and time, which is very typical of EA in the late 2000s and early 2010s. 2010s. Granted, there's only so much you can do visually with, hell, but with a production time of only around 2 years, you're pretty limited. I do like that you come across random sinners and you're given the choice to forgive or punish them, each giving you points towards your holy and unholy meters. Saying that out loud is absurd. This is like everything evangelists feared about video games growing up, and the fact that you can say something like, oh yeah, make sure to punish Chiako on chapter 3 so you can reach level 4 unholy is hysterical. This dude just liked to eat. Time for double murder. I think EA wanted Dante's Inferno to be a way bigger deal than it ended up being. I mean, it was their answer to Sony's God of War. It was a big budget AAA. They set up a sequel in the credits and were even working on it. There was a comic book series and even an animated film, and we can't forget the DLC that came out 2 months after release, Trials of St. Lucia. I never played this myself as I bought the game at release and slammed through it in a weekend, but this was a multiplayer fighting arena that was actually playable co-op. Seemed kind of close to a Bloody Tower type of thing, but with the ability to customize the arenas online. I don't think anyone was expecting Dante to go multiplayer, but there we go. However, this was sunset without warning in 2020 and is no longer playable. It's a shame. Unfortunately, the developer Visceral would work with EA on the Dead Space series and would also get shut down in 2017 to no fault of their own considering the publisher in charge. The good old EA kill count. Apparently a second Dante's Inferno was in development, but I think the subpar sales, reception, and a lack of interest put this one on the shelf. It doesn't help that when Inferno came out, it was quite literally surrounded by high-profile releases. In the months surrounding it, you'd get Mass Effect 2, Stalker, BioShock 2, the heavily advertised Heavy Rain, and then God of War 3 itself was less than a month out. Though if you ask me, they're crazy for releasing a day after Star Ocean 4.
I want to take nappy time with Edgy.
I would have loved to see what Visceral could have done with a second attempt, or even a little more development time. Dante's Inferno is a game that has really solid fundamentals, exciting and gripping combat, and a concept that, for technically a licensed game, is memorable. Or it'll at least leave an image of Lucifer's dong stuck in your mind forever. Sorry, can't show it, but you got Google. I will say they did a really good job porting this thing to the PSP. It's kind of impressive they fit a majority of it in there. These days, if you don't want to whip out an old bulky console, the only way to play Dante's Inferno is on the Xbox series via Game Pass, or shoving an old 360 copy into the disc drive via backwards compatibility. And it does look really nice running upscaled and with a smoother frame rate. I don't think this will ever get ported due to Visceral not existing anymore, but we've got a Dead Space remake on the horizon, so you never know. Overall, for being the game that people think about when the words God of War clone come up, it sure does a pretty decent job holding up over the years. If you've never tried it before, I honestly think Dante's Inferno is a fun 6 or 7 hour long romp for anyone that wants to see a completely ridiculous concept take itself 100% seriously.
The third circle of hell, reserved for gluttons, like the guy who always takes the last donut on Donut Friday.
So there you have it, the often forgotten world of God of War clones. A lot, and I mean a lot of these games are pretty much stuck on the 7th generation and were like one and done kind of deal. So if you want to go back and play some of these, a lot of them portless, you're gonna have to dig out some old hardware. Or in the case of X-Men Origins Wolverine, other methods. You can play Garchasp though, but maybe you shouldn't. I covered as many as I thought fit this time around, and believe me, there's a lot of games I axed that people were saying were God of War clones that I'm like, I don't know about that, but I've been wrong before, so if there's anything you think that really fits here that I missed, let me know down in the comments and I'll see if I can cover it again in the future. Brain hurt, too many games. Make sure to check out today's sponsor, and if you want to support the channel directly, hop on over to the Patreon or buy a t-shirt at the Pixel Empire. I'm also going to be opening up the Discord server to the public in mid-January with a couple of different rooms to make it so it works for everybody, so stay tuned to that. You can check out updates on that, probably on my Twitter or maybe a YouTube community post, I don't know. Am I doing this because of the other social media being weird and not great? Maybe. Anyways, I've been Austin, and catch me next time when we go into the big annual video of my suffering or Gotham Knights, whatever one gets finished first. I'm juggling here. Thank you so much for watching. Special Patreon shout out to A. Vox, Aaron Kwolek, Blackfoot Ferret, Chris Shelton, Christopher Oliva, Doug Prince, DX Buster, David Molnar, Elijah, GN Pinks, Hate Quiggles, Jay Roos, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Kevin Zanowski, Karen Arter, Nami Babs, Nick Irving, Ryan Talbert, and Shazan. Thank you all so much for your generous support. It's December, holidays are here, and we got a couple more videos to close out the month. I'm gonna be working my hardest to get some stuff out for the holiday season, and then I'm gonna be taking a little bit of a break, just like a month or so. I will be at MagFest 2023, so I'm not there on any kind of official capacity. I just like to troll around and go goblin mode or whatever the kids are saying these days. Also, yes, I will be opening the Discord. I will have more details on that later, so you can join the chaos and hopefully not do anything stupid. Also, right now, go drink a glass of water. You need it. Okay, bye.